Hey everybody, this is Britton going live again on Wednesday. Barely made it today. I've been illustrating some covers or designing some covers for some new books, so it's been a crazy day. These books will be out later this year. So welcome to the group. Today I wanted to talk about something different. I know we kind of delved in, not to politics, but to controversial history last week. I noticed most of you didn't leave the groups. That's great. You guys are open to hearing different perspectives. I think it's the truth. And that's why you guys are here. And that's why this is a private group, because we're going to talk about big topics. And I'm just going to give it to you. I'm just going to give you the truth as I see it. It's not going to be politically correct. If you want to leave the group, that's fine. I don't get paid. I don't want you to leave the group, but I just do this for your benefit and for our community that we're growing and for Blue Manor Academy. So anyway. Today, I'm going to talk about something a little bit more benign, that is grammar, but here it's going to be a little controversial, and it's a secret truth. If your kids are in the room, you may not even want them to hear this truth. This is a truth about grammar. Like I said, I'm an author, so I've written a lot of books, written a lot of children's books, done a lot of writing, so you can take it that this is the truth. The truth is there are no rules to grammar. There are no grammar rules. They're only guidelines. Now, your teacher didn't want to tell you this when you were in school because a lot of kids, if they say there are no rules, the kids will think that they can do anything. But the truth is grammar is an art, not modern art. Again, if you say it's an art, kids will think, well, that's beautiful to me. Not true. There are guidelines, there are best practices, there are principles, but technically there are no rules. And the reason this is actually important to tell your kids up front, I'm trying to fix my camera here. No matter what, it's crooked. There we go. Okay. The reason you want to tell your kids this rule up front is because, especially if they're being raised for greatness, they're going to be reading a lot of books. And when they read books, they're going to come across, they're going to be like subconsciously absorbing grammar rules. And they're going to see things and they're going to say, oh, cool. Well, when I sit down and I write my paper, I'm going to use that. I'm going to use, put a comma there, or I'm going to use that quotation or that style, right? And then they're going to turn it into their teachers if they're in public school, or maybe even you if you don't know any better, and you're going to mark it wrong. And you're going to say, no, you can never start a sentence with because. I remember my teachers always told me that. You can never start a sentence with because. That's just not true. But most kids don't understand the rule, or not the rule, but the guidelines or the concept. And so they'll just start because, a sentence because, and it won't be proper, and it will just because they're lazy. And they'll be using it wrong. So to kind of avoid that common mistake when people do start a sentence with because and it becomes a fragment, your teacher will just give you some sort of blanket rule and say you can never start a sentence with because. But there are a lot of great sentences that start with because. I love to do that, and it gives you variety. Another thing that reason your kids need to know this is there's a difference between UK grammar and especially spelling and American grammar and UK spelling. And this was really hard for me because I read a lot of the classics growing up. And so I'm learning these grammar rules, and I'll give you one that we just ran into, me and my editor, the other day, and it was a huge, not a controversy, but a big, long discussion, like an hour discussion as we're researching this, because we both had kind of a different perspective. And if your kids are reading the classics, they're going to be learning UK grammar, UK English, and they're going to be learning a lot of Old English. So the spelling's going to be different, the grammar's different. It's not wrong. It's just not as modern. And if they don't know that there aren't any perfect grammar rules, if they don't know that there are rules, they'll absorb those rules, and then when they'll write them, and they'll get marked wrong. And the person that marks them wrong is incorrect because there shouldn't be any standards. But a lot of colleges, they'll develop like best practices, like the MLA standard, and you may want to look into that. I tend to shy away from that because those are not rules. Those are just guidelines. And I hate to having kids memorize all of those guidelines as rules. And then after they get out of college, those guidelines stick with them in their head, and they think that they are rules that can't be broken. But like I said, it is important because as your kids are reading different books, they're going to be absorbing these different grammar rules, and then it will look wrong to other people. So one, there are no rules. The second thing you need to know is you probably do want to have some sort of standard, like the American standard version of grammar in your head. And you may want the MLA, which I think a lot of colleges do use. That's what they were doing when I was, but it's been a while. I guess it's been a while. So maybe they're not. But the reason is people who don't understand writing, who aren't professional writers, they will think that there are rules and they will judge you for it. I get it all the time, and I'm not amazing at grammar. but I'm good enough. But I get people on my blog or something. Back in the day, I used to get criticism. Whenever they disagreed with the point I made, they'd say, well, your grammar is horrible. And I'm like, I'm a professional author. My grammar is just fine. But they'd say, well, what about this rule? Or you misplaced these commas and stuff. And it's like, man, that's so sad because there are no rules. You think, like your education, you think that good writing is just about putting things together grammatically correct. That's not good writing. There are no rules. The only rule is that it has to make sense. It has to be able to communicate your ideas to your audience. That's really the only rule. If your kid is writing something and he's misplacing his commas and his punctuation and stuff like that, and it's confusing the reader, then he's not writing well. But if he's breaking some of the grammar rules and the reader gets it and knows why he did it and he did it for effect and he's mastered the art of grammar and grammar is an art, then that's the right thing to do. There are times that I throw in a comma, which sounds horrible to most people, but me and my editor will talk about it. We're like, you know what? We need a comma in that sentence. It's too longer. Or you actually you can frame what you're going to say with a comma. So if I want my reader to pause for a second and I want to separate like a profound statement that I'm using at the end, I can throw in a comma to make my reader stop and pause just a second, and then I frame that last little segment of the sentence. And if a normal grammar teacher, English teacher, something was looking at that, they'd say, you don't need a comma there, take it out. I absolutely need a comma there for the effect. So again, there are no rules. And I would say if you're grading your own kids' papers and stuff, be aware of that mostly this is an art. You are free to break rules. One of the greatest all-time writers in history is Shakespeare. He just made stuff up. If he needed a word that didn't exist, he'd take a noun and turn it into a verb or vice versa or something like that. And he was profound. He knew the language well enough. He understood grammar well enough that he knew how to break it and still communicate properly. Okay, so that's one thing. What we got into a big discussion about this week was I capitalized king. So I said, I think I introduced King Louis XVI, let's say. And then instead of continuing to say King Louis XVI, I would say the king. And I capitalized king. And my editor said, no, you can't capitalize king. And she was really good. She showed me all the rules and all the places they said that's ridiculous. And you don't capitalize king anymore. And it's not a proper noun, okay? And I was like, well, I've always capitalized king. Or the president, not if you're talking about the president of the United States generically, like, we have a Congress, and then we have the president is in office, right? That would be lowercase. But if I'm talking about Trump, and I don't want to keep saying President Trump, I could just say, if I'm talking about Trump, I could just say the president, capitalize, and that's a proper noun for Trump. You know who I'm talking about. So that was my rule. My editor had a different rule, and it said that you don't capitalize it, you always lowercase it. And so she was having me go back and edit all this stuff. Well, finally, it was really funny because I have a quote in the book, the next book, which is really good, on character, and I think it's Charles Dickens' History. I'm quoting Charles Dickens' History, and guess what? He said, the king capitalized. So then we thought, okay, is this like a UK rule? Is it like an old English rule? And we had to go back and study. My editor said she had to search the internet forever, just searching and searching and searching. And like on the last page of the internet, she found a great defense of capitalizing it. And so what did we do? Did we capitalize it? Did we not? We had to sit down and say, okay, what's the standard that we want to use? It has to be the same standard or to confuse readers. And then in this instance, what are the pros and cons? And we discussed it. But there wasn't a perfect rule. You can discuss grammar. You can make up grammar if you need it. The purpose of good writing is communicating your thoughts and ideas. Usually that is done best by using proper grammar, but sometimes it's not. So always remember that the best writers are not the ones who are very grammatical. The best writers are the ones that can communicate powerfully. That's what your kids need to know. But anyway, this confused me too. Like it's so funny. Sometimes my editor will correct some words that I've said. She's like, oh no, that's misspelled. And sometimes she's correct. And I have this UK version in my head. Like for example, with traveled, you put two L's in. A lot of times, the UK version, they put two L's in, or they put two letters in before ending with ED. Usually in the US, we don't. And so sometimes we'd go back and forth on those, and there'd be some confusion because we both read a lot, and so we both seen those words spelled differently. I used to really favor UK because I'm always reading the classics, classic literature, and so I would just always, correct it. Even on InDesign, the program I use to make my books, you have to select UK or American, and that will help it spell check properly. So those are things that kids should be aware of. I think it's really important for them to be aware of before they start reading. That comes from reading books by, yes, British authors, exactly, which are a lot of the classics. So I wish somebody would have told me that earlier, because I would always get confused, and then I would think my English teacher's wrong. I'm like, what is she talking about? I look at, it's right here. Like they use this comma splice, or they started the sentence with because, and this is a professional author. Like, why did my teacher say you can never start a sentence with because? So anyway, it would always confuse me, and it created a lot of confusion. And then I'm going to take, let's say, an SAT or some sort of, standardized test, and I'm reading so much, and then I'm getting stuff wrong, even though it's not technically wrong, but it's not American. But nobody really explained that to me, to be honest. And even in America, there's no standard grammar. Everybody has these different, like the MLA is common for college, but other people, or if you go, like, let's say you started working for, I don't know, New York Times, they probably have their own version of the MLA, like best practices. And me and my editor the other day were like, we should just come up with our own Blue Manor best practices. We'll put it in a book, and then nobody can tell us we're wrong, because it'll be according to our own standards. And this actually happened to me in high school too. I went from a prep school in Virginia, and then I went to another school, a little private Christian school, and I was using the MLA standard at prep school, which is like the official standard. I'm thinking, I can't go wrong with this. Anyway, we were supposed to write a paper, and she'd send us this like sheet. It was a works cited sheet, and it was how to document your footnotes and all that stuff, right? Well, I lost it, and I'm writing it like one of the last days. I'm finishing up my paper, and I lost it, and I thought, well, I can't go wrong using the MLA standard. It's like the official standard, and I did it perfectly according to the MLA standard. She gave me 0 points for my work cited because I didn't do it according to her formatting. So that was bad on me. I think it was also bad on my English teacher, because she understood what I was saying. Like, that's the purpose of communication. She's so caught up in the grammar and the rules. I'm sorry. I think she was wrong. At the same time, I made a big mistake thinking that, if I was thinking in my head, like, her works cited couldn't be different from the MLA because there's only one standard, right? So, big mistake, and she gave me no points for it, which we debated for a while, but she held her ground. Okay, because, I want to throw this out there. Passive sentences. Whenever you talk about great writing and you go look for tips, whenever you get those tips, whether it's parenting and they say, 10 tips to make parenting easier, just scroll on by. Usually that's the ABCs. It's just so basic and it's so elementary that it doesn't apply to good writing. So a lot of times you'll say, don't use passive sentences. I'm sure you've heard that if you've studied writing at all. They always say don't use passive sentences. Yes, usually you don't use passive sentences. There's actually a time when you should use passive sentences, and it's if you want a passive voice. So again, you have to teach your kids that this is an art. They're like, what does a passive voice, why is it inferior? Well, usually it is kind of like dancing around what you're trying to say, but there's a time when maybe you want to ease into what you're saying by using a passive sentence. So again, there's no rules, just guidelines. So it's important that your kids understand the art or the thought behind the rule. Like, why does your teacher usually say you can't use because? It's not a blanket rule, but why? Oh, she doesn't want you to write a fraction, a fragment, sorry. But that's another thing. Can you write fragments? There's no rule that says you can't write sentence fragments. Sometimes it's the best way to write a sentence. There's sometimes when you want to end on a strong note, you don't want those extra words. Like, you can do it as long as it makes sense and doesn't make you look dumb, communicates your ideas. I don't generally recommend it, but sometimes the professionals do it. They do it for effect. Maybe they don't want a comma, they want a period because it really stops you and then starts you, and they don't want to use an EM dash. So again, it's all art. Let your kids know that. So here's the takeaway, okay? Here's what I want you to remember. 1, it's all art. 2, because it's an art, that's not an excuse that anything goes, okay? Writing is not, and grammar is art, okay? Not just writing, grammar is art. Me and my editor have debated commas for like 15, 20 minutes. Like, debated a comma. Like, what's the effect? And is it more emotional if we put it this way or this way? So it's all an art, but that's not an excuse for modern art. It doesn't mean you can throw your commas in anywhere you want and your kid can say it's good. So they need to understand, like, there's good art and there's bad art. So do learn grammar, but don't get stuck and pigeonholed inside of the grammar. And then one thing I would have that conversation with every kid is UK and American English. They're different, not hugely different, but they're different. Your kids need to know the difference. I wish that when you read a book like a classic, like let's say Charles Dickens or something, or I don't know, Shakespeare or whatever, they would say at the beginning, and we've actually put that in some of our books, this is Old English and it's UK English, you know, or something like that. Warning, like the grammar, like don't pay attention to the grammar, or just, you know, just warning, like the rules over there are different. It would probably make grammar easier for kids. Okay, I don't want to ramble on. I'm used to talking for like an hour on here. It seems very short right now to just click finish, but I'm going to do it. You guys got your tip. If you guys have any questions, just write them below. I'm welcome to the group. All of you who are here, always leave questions. Even if it's not a live video, you can leave questions in our discussion. When you sign up, you leave questions. Your questions always come first. But if you don't have anything, you know, I'll wing it at the end. So thank you guys so much. We'll talk to you next week.